Welcome to the Real Life Overtime Podcast, the place where the members of the Real Life Ministries sermon team go deeper into the weekend sermon. Watch them as they unpack, unfold, and unravel the weekend sermon like never before. So fasten your seatbelts, hit play, and join us for Real Life Overtime, where every episode is an adventure and this sermon doesn't end on Sunday.
Welcome, Real Life Ministries, to the Overtime Podcast. And every week we take some time after the sermons to go into subjects in a deeper way that we weren't able to go into in the sermon itself. And right now we're in a sermon series called Lost in Translation. And this week we did something a little bit different. Rather than looking at a word that's been redefined by the culture, we're looking at a concept, a truth that has been lost in our culture. And we're looking at the concept of resilience, the need for it. And yesterday in the message, we talked about the reason that resilience is needed for a believer is because we live in a sin-torn world. We live in a cursed world. We have a sinful nature. We have a culture that's pursuing things that don't resemble what God is all about. We're pursuing as a culture things that are completely contradictory, I guess I would say. And because we have a spiritual enemy, a liar, a deceiver, we struggle in a variety of different ways to be resilient. We have to get back up. We have to persevere. The race marked out for us in Hebrews 12 requires perseverance, requires resilience. You will fail. You will be wronged. You're a Christ follower. God allows it. None of us can be perfect. And though we're growing and we're becoming more Christ-like and we're bringing light with us and we're causing less damage than we used to, I don't know about you guys, but in a day, I can make a stupid decision I didn't even mean to make and cause myself angst and problems and everybody else problems as well. And, as guys who actually work with me, they all know that to be true. I can make a mess for them. But we're looking at this concept, and I mentioned this yesterday, we're looking at this concept of resilience as it pertains to parenting in this Overtime Podcast. I'm blessed to work with some great guys. I get to be here today with Chris Short, who is one of our executive pastors. He helped he was in charge of our children's ministry and for a long time, and now he oversees marriage and family. He has 4 daughters of his own, 4 teenage daughters.
All teenagers officially now.
Yeah, all 4. And this concept of he's had to be resilient.
Very resilient.
In dealing with 5 women at the house every time you go in, right? Wife
Blessed.
and 4 daughters.
Thank you.
I'm also here with Pat Lassard, who is one of our staff members, was raised up here in the church, married a lady here in our church, was in ministry with us for a long time, recovery ministry, and then helping to lead a campus here, the Coeur d'Alene campus. Now he's back doing our marriage and family ministry. Yeah. And he's got kids, a blended family.
Blended
family. And so granddaughters, raising kids, grandkids. And so I get to talk to guys here who have really done more than just read about it and thought about it from a ministry mindset. These are guys who have battled and fought for their kids. And my story. I wrote a book called Hope for the Prodigal based on my experience with my son and what I did to my parents. I wrote that with my dad. And we have all kinds of right now media stuff that's helpful for this subject, books that have been written by others as well. But I'm excited to talk about this subject today because so many parents have taken one of 2 ditches in the road. You got a road down the middle. You got on one side, I'm going to protect my kids so that they don't have to deal with any sort of problems. And on the other side of the road, it's like, hey, nobody took care of me. Throw you in the deep end of the water, and you're going to swim. And so you've got the sort of hands-off approach and then the hands totally on approach to raising kids. When you think about raising kids, Chris. God gave us a mission to have our kids ready. And what have you learned about this concept of raising resilient kids?
Yeah, I think it's such a tricky one because I think all parents go into it with just the hope is I want them to just succeed in this world. I want them to have the things that I didn't have. I grew up super poor. And so like, I look at my kid's life and I'm like, how do I help them at the end of the day, at the end of their time with my oldest is turning 18 next month and it feels crazy. My youngest is 13. And so we're in the thick of it. And I want them to walk out. I want them to leave my home. Like they're not meant to stay in my home forever, but I want them to do it and have been prepared to actually go into this world to be contributors and not just had the silver spoon in their mouth. Like there's this, I think, real tension between loving, caring, and then actually equipping them in the right things. And it's so easy. I mean, just looking back and me and my wife navigating, it'd be so easy just to go, let's take away all the difficulty because I love them so much. But if they don't go through those things, where they develop that skill. And one just little example I was thinking of for my oldest daughter when she started driving, there's a lot of parents that choose to just buy their kids a car and it's like, here's your car. And we had the conviction that they need to work for a car. And so we had an old minivan that she drove for the first season of learning to drive. It was dented and the heater barely worked and, filling it up with gas, it would seize up. You could only put a gallon of gas in at a time. And me and my wife just laughed about the season because she's out there driving herself to high school, in the cold, frosted window, couldn't put gas in it. She's like, gonna be late. But I just cherished that time. And then she wanted to buy a car. Like she saved up money to buy a car. Right. But without that, how would she have, and that's just a simple worldly example, but those are the things we have to, to train them in, to help them to truly be able to withstand the difficulty of the storm of our world. So that's just a couple thoughts.
Yeah. Pat, when you think about the role of a parent, what really comes to your mind when you think about what we've been talking about?
One of the things I think about, I have 4 kids myself, and one of the things I think about is it really does require being present and knowing your kid, right? That's great. I have 4 very different personalities, and so part of my role as a parent, probably first and foremost, is these are God's kids, right? These are His first, and I actually have a responsibility. I don't own them. They're not mine, but I have a responsibility to walk out, okay, God, what is it you're doing and wanting to do in them? And that road looks so different for Connor than it did for Eli, than it did for Owen, than it does for Maggie. And so, just knowing that, and I guess like giving ourselves the space has been part of a conversation for Lisa and I of going, we're going to do things different for Connor. We love him the same. We're going to provide for him and all those things, but we're going to provide for them different opportunities or press into them differently based off of their personality, their maturity, and just what we sense they needed in that season. So parenting them individually, uniquely was important to us.
Yeah, I think you said something that's really good. Both of you implied this. These kids belong to the Lord. He knit them together in their mother's womb.
Yep.
He has an eternal plan in mind for them. Our job is to raise them to know the Lord and to be ready to live for Him, to do things like the physical things like raise them to know how to work for money, right? To do a good job, to appreciate the things that they have. There are physical aspects of raising your kid, teaching them to do chores and to work for things. But then there's the spiritual part of it, teaching them that relationships in the world are broken, to have the right expectation that wherever they go, their biggest problem is them, and they contribute to a problem in relationship. And to not have this pie in the sky idea that if you find your soulmate, it's going to be easy, because love is a denial of self for the good of the other, and that's never easy for people because they have a sinful nature. To go, all right, we want them to know God's plan, to be walking towards heaven, to know how to raise their own kids, to know how to supply for their families. We want them, we know when they go into the world, there's a spiritual battle going on, internal, external, cultural. I want them ready for that. I want them to know it's a war, and it's a marathon war. There are good days too. There are good seasons too.
Totally.
But staying married for their whole life is going to mean dying to yourself and forgiving and battling.
Yeah.
It's not, if you find your soulmate, it's all going to be great, you know.
It's going to take work.
Yeah, to stand up for your values in the culture. It's not just a one-time decision. Can I stand here even if I stand alone?
Yeah, it makes me think of, really, you talk about a lot, are we training them on what game we're playing? You know, because a lot of parents will focus on so many different avenues that are important. They're great. You know, it's like academics, sports, learning how to have a career, how to have a relationship, but they make that the goal, the prize that they're what they're trying to achieve. And I think really the point in this whole conversation is our chief goal is that they know Jesus and that they are discipled in that aspect of through all the things that they're growing up and experiencing, we're using those as teachable moments in their faith. And so their faith and helping develop them in resilience, it really is, you know, we're going back to the scripture. We're trying to help them understand, okay, so you broke up with a boyfriend or you lost a job. What did you learn? It's the debriefing, but the chief end isn't you get a good job, you're amazing at this sport, which again, what do the stats say? It's, you know, 1 in 50,000 become a professional athlete when every single kid's going to stand before the Lord like one day. That's the reality. And so what is the end game we're really shooting for?
That's cool. Yeah. I think something that's exciting for me in that, in parenting, I think parenting's been one of the most rewarding things in my life and one of the hardest things, right? Yeah. And then I've learned so much from God, about that opportunity, right? Like, okay, what it must be like.
He's the Heavenly Father, and I'm the father of that kid.
Yeah.
How does that feel to be the father?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think about the opportunity. It's about discipling them in Jesus likeness, right? And so as they face these different situations in life, it's about them growing in hearing God's voice and knowing God's voice. And, you know, what you're talking about as well is you got to know the enemy's voice as well, right? And you have to discern what is it God's doing in your life, because he's always calling you deeper into relationship with him, that you would know him more as he's making you more like him. Yeah. And then I also think about, as far as our responsibility, that diagram of the comfort zone in the circle, right? And then the stretch zone outside of that, and then the panic zone. And the stretch zone is where we learn the most. It's really the learning zone. And so we have this responsibility within life being life, right? And helping our kids not live in that stretch zone, but help them, you know, adapt to that and manage some of those panic zone, you know, scary situations. But you know, it'll be the death of us if we just live in our comfort zone. Yeah. And that's our natural default.
Yeah. Anything that's uncomfortable, we want to get rid of. It
totally.
Can't be God's will.
Totally.
And that's always been funny to me, because to be a disciple of Jesus and follow Jesus, Jesus was constantly moving them into ways that were not normal or natural to them. Dying to yourself, caring about the hurting rather than being irritated by them. The little children were noisy. Get them out of here. You know, he was always pressing them to become less and less them and more like him. Right. And so when we as parents think it's our job to eliminate any sort of hard work or failure, failure is a great tool. That doesn't mean you're, if you failed, you're not a failure. It means that now let's debrief it. Let's look at it. I've got to help you build from this. And sometimes failing in this area means God's moving you over here. It's not the end of your life. You have to learn to be adaptable. You have to learn to see the opportunities instead of all the no's. You have to work through the no's to have a greater yes. I mean, there's so many parts of this. And again, if you know what the world is, and you know your end game is to help develop a thriver in there, a survivor, a person who fights and wins, and when they struggle, they keep going. They're going to need, helping them to develop patterns that will help them be resilient, like relationships with other people.
Absolutely.
If you're not helping your kids to have relationship, which, by the way, to have real relationship, you have to be resilient, because there's even problems in relationship. Yeah. If you're not helping them build relationships, you're affecting their resiliency. You're impacting their perseverance, because God actually helps us persevere and thrive and be resilient because of the relationships that we built.
That's a good point. Yep.
And so teaching your kid to be a friend and to have friends, biblical friends. We're talking about this next week in the Lost in Translation series. Being a friend, showing them what that looks like, that is helping them persevere in the future.
That's good.
Yeah.
You said something about knowing your kids. So many parents are out there pursuing their own stuff, and they just want their kids to be quiet so they have peace, or so they'll fix their problems or do whatever. But you're looking at Song of Solomon chapter 8, I believe it is, where he says, if your daughter is a wall, adorn her, show her off. If your daughter is a door, put guardrails and guards there. And that's looking at each of your kids are different. Know your kids, and then be appropriate for them in the stage of life that they're in.
Yep.
Explain that a little bit more.
Well, yeah, in that stage of life, I think is really appropriate. Who of you was too hard on your firstborn?
Oh, yeah.
Like, okay, you learn a lot in that. And man, I remember, Connor, and I think he was 4 years old, and putting too much pressure on him and tying his shoes. Like, man, I wish he would have chilled out. But by the time my fourth, kid comes, like, it doesn't even matter. You can wear Velcro forever.
Velcro shoes, yeah.
But being able to meet them in that age, and being able to, parent them appropriately in the age to be able to meet them where they're at. I mean, I've had teenage kids, and some of them at 16 were ready to start testing the waters in romantic relationship, and then others not. You're not ready. You're not ready for someone else. And then, as far as education, we've done all sorts of different things to be able to, what does this kid need in this season? And that has looked different. There hasn't been a one size fits all. And I really appreciate my wife's leadership in that component of it as well. I don't know, what about you as far as like ministering to them in that appropriate age and stage?
I was thinking of Proverbs, train up a child, in the way they should go. And when they're old, they won't depart from it. And that, that's a tricky one, because it goes, what's my part as a parent? And where am I trying to prepare them? How am I training them up? Like, that's always the question for me. Because it's like, man, I feel like my time is limited. It really is. Like, legitimately, from the time they're born till the time they leave my house, there are a limited number of weeks that I have with them. I think it's 762, something like that. It's like, how many weeks do I have with my kid? What's most important? And that's where it goes back to, I want, at the end of the day, they've seen Jesus through our family, that they've been able to experience and grow. And I'm so grateful. I was just thinking of, for my family, the church being the backup, and more than just that. Like, when my kids are struggling with something, they have so many layers and support. They're small group leaders, the life group members that they can process with, that love them. And I think that resilience piece is important. And I don't think the world has enough of that. The church has something to offer there that's so special. When we have these volunteer leaders, we have people who are just surrounding in the same mission. That's that safety net for them. And that's where, like, I can trust that they can fall and stumble in some things, because I know there's 10 people that are around them to help pick them up. And again, do I want them to fall and bang up their knee or whatever you want to call it spiritually? No, but I'm grateful that we've put in place that community, and that would be just maybe action step for those who are listening is, how could you reinforce the community now in a time where you're doing okay? Because there will be times of difficulty. Yeah. So that's just something in my heart.
Let's talk about that for a second.
That's good.
Here's most parents. Whatever church service they go to that fits their life, they go to, whatever church,
Yep.
right? And then they'll bounce around from church to church to church based on a sermon series, or they got upset with somebody, or, you know, they don't press in. And when they don't press in and plug in and get involved, they take their kids with them. And so their kids bounce around from place to place, and it ends up being a place you go instead of a community or family you have.
Yeah.
And in my life, I've been here 25 years. The numbers of times where other people spoke life into my kids or correction into my kids when they would not hear it from me.
Yeah.
When that's his dad or mom, right? The people that stepped in, the love that that was shown to my kids, and that was built over time. I think about our young families, right? If I'd have gotten ticked off and left the church, right? If I would have been bored and gone somewhere else, if I would have done what so many do, then my kids would not have had the relationships that they had. I mean, 2 of my kids married girls from our youth group, right? If I'm bouncing around, and by the way, as a parent, disciplining your children, if I didn't make my kids go to church camp or make my kids go to a missions trip, then my son would have never met his wife.
Yep.
Because he was forced to go. He was fighting me. He was angry. And I'm like, you're going. And you know, I'm not your friend right now. I'm your dad. And what you need right now is this. And you don't need that. And you're going. And I don't make him go. He doesn't meet his wife, right? The numbers of people that have invested in my kids, because this is a church family here. And sometimes it's, you know, there were people that ticked me off or made me angry or hurt my feelings, or there were times where I was bored in my walk with God in one way or another, and I didn't go, well, I think the Lord wants me to go somewhere else. It's pressing in, building, being resilient, pressing in, persevering, enduring, continuing on so that those I was leading could settle in and have that around them. And then when they'd get mad at their youth group or whatever, no, that's not what we do here. You know, you're going to keep pressing in. You're going to go and have that conversation. You're going to go and work this out. You're going to go and forgive that person. We're going to do this together. That created a family structure. But I had to discipline. I had to set priorities. I had to do things. A lot of people don't want to discipline their kids because they're not disciplined. That means you'd have to do something consistently, and they don't want to do that, which then means their kids learn it's only wrong if you're in a specific mood.
Yeah.
So
I want to jump off of what you just shared, because this principle, this universal principle of parenting is so important. More is caught than taught. So as you talk about that creating that community and pushing them outside of those comfort zones into those stretch zones, those necessary growth zones, they're going to pick up more from your example, right? What you do and the friendships that you press into, the conflicts that you press into, what devotions look like for you, right? What church looks like for you, your relationship with God. And so they're going to, by osmosis, right? They're going to pick up the most of it. And that's what they'll fall back on in the midst of, you know, learning and growing. It's crucial.
Yeah, it was the relationships I had that helped me when I was in my darkest times, that held me up and kept me going through them. My kids learned that I needed that. It had to be okay for me to share that. And people stepped into that. It wasn't just me. Like so many pastors, they just pour into everybody else and never let anybody pour into them. So it looks like to their kids, everybody's a taker. So why do we want to go to church? They're all takers. But if you're honest and we're in relationship and you're giving and you're receiving, my kids saw that, and they saw what it meant in my life, and they had the opportunity to see it and live it out in their own. And it's been something they've taken on in their own life.
That's good.
And I'll just tell you,
good.
God's plan actually works, but it means that you have to press in and persevere because people fail and struggle and blow it.
Yep. And we got to build our kids to have that resilience. And I love the word stretching, because if we don't help intentionally stretch them in some areas, it's almost like, well, what's the panic zone? They'll break, and if they're not prepared for it.
Yeah. Well, and we just love our comfort zone, right? And entertainment, and just it's so easy these days. We have to be forced outside of that to grow,
Which is also disciple making, right? And I think that's
Exactly
the part of this
it,
whole conversation is that's what an intentional parent as a disciple maker is going to do. Is I think you need some toughness in this area. You got to be stretched a little bit in something that you might not think you're ready for, but we want to help you be developed, build resilience.
Can you give me an example of somebody who, rather than taking the pressure off of you when it was going hard, was going rough, and you were tempted to get out, said, wait a minute. I'll just give you an example in my own life. I was my first year in ministry. I was in a church where I got in and I saw what was going on behind the scenes, and it was ugly. It was unethical. It was just brutal. And I called my dad up, and I'm like, man, this ministry thing, this is terrible. These are hypocrites, and I was just I'm done. I kept saying that. And he goes, well, let me ask you a question. Why do you think God moved David underneath Saul? Saul was a wicked king. You know the story. He tried to kill David. He was immoral, but God had him moved there. And I said, well, yeah, that's a good question. Why did God do that? And my dad said, well, Jim, God knew that character is built through tough times, and God wanted to show David what it looks like to reject God. You're going to be the king, David. I'm going to build some character. I'm going to give you a model what it looks like if you do this wrong. And he said, Jim, if God calls you somewhere else, okay, but don't run. Just because it's bad doesn't mean it's not good. And it was like, wow, okay, I needed to be resilient. I needed to not just run from a problem. What lessons could I learn from this? How did God want me to step in and be a part of a solution for the good of everybody else in the church while this thing is going ugly, right? What does it look like to submit to authority? What does it look like to learn and trust God in all of it? And that was he used analogies like, hey, when you were in wrestling, did your coach ever put you through all kinds of different hard things? And was he even wrong about some things? Well, yeah, every coach has been wrong, right? Sure. So what do you do during those times? Do you quit the team? What do you do? And so those were always lessons for me, in that there was a fatal flaw my dad would try to protect me from. If it's going to kill you, we're going to get you out of it. If somebody tells you to sin, don't do that. But if you're living in a rough culture, what does it look like to trust in God? Because guess what? When you get into the world, you're going to have an unethical boss. You're going to have somebody who makes a mistake. You're going to have a government that goes crazy theoretically. You're going to have all this. What do you do in the midst of a broken world?
That's great. So we grow the most, for sure. Yep.
I don't have a figure, like your dad invests in you, but I just think about my relationship with God, where God just hasn't rescued me from, uncomfortability. He's allowed me to stay in and, didn't just pull me from, which has changed my expectations, about life. And then as far as it relates to parenting as well, like, man, we just, in my flesh, I just want things to go well and my way and easily. And guess what? That same thing's in my kids, right? And so being able to be that, intentional dad involved in their lives, to be able to help them press in. I remember I think my son was 16, Eli, who was working at a pet store over off of Northwest Boulevard over here. And he worked with this really mean, crotchety dude. I don't know what the dude's problem was. And he'd come home sad, like crying, sometimes. And this kid, Eli, he's so sweet. And River just kind of coaching him like, okay, hang in there. What's going on? Just kind of, do these things. But just trying to help him press into like, this dude's fighting a different battle. It's not you. Like, hang in there. And there was a really cool redemptive pivot to it soon after that, where they ended up having a good friendship. And the guy totally changed. But so just, one example of just pressing in and God showing up in that,
That's awesome. Cool.
Yeah, I think as leaders, as parents, we are disciple makers. Every one of us who's a Christian is a disciple who makes disciples. If we have a home, we're disciple makers. And our job is to make disciples that make disciples.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest call back to parents I would like to say is you were given a job. You were given a responsibility, especially to dads, who oftentimes can be passive or domineering. You were given a job. There's an end goal in mind. It's like a coach.
Mm-hmm.
State's coming, there's an end goal in mind. I get freshmen as a senior, there's an end goal in mind for these kids. I need to have them ready for what they're going to face. I need to pay attention to what's going on with them so that I can coach them, which means that I have to have focus on the right things in my own life. Work cannot be where my identity is.
Mm-hmm.
It's where I work so that I can be God's man. It's my mission field. Mm-hmm. It's my place to supply what I can give to my family and share with others. I have to have this abiding relationship with God where he centers me in the 5 spheres. Who am I in these areas? What is my identity? What am I going to do with my time, energy, and resources? At the end of the day, what is the win? Yep. And I'm just praying that our parents will put their eyes on the most important things, become intentional, understand how much time they have, understand what the goals are, and then understand we want our kid to have the right information, but they're going to have to be resilient in a broken world. They're going to have to get back up again. They're going to have to persevere and endure. I use this example, and we'll close with this. In wrestling, I said, I can teach you the moves in wrestling, the top, bottom, and neutral, but I can teach you those moves without getting you perseverance. I can have the person you're wrestling with just let you do it. Mm-hmm. So you're going to learn the move, but you're going to learn the move against somebody that isn't actually fighting back. In the real world, there's a battle on, and if I don't build into the system perseverance, it doesn't matter what you can't do it if you can't breathe. You're exhausted. Exhaustion makes cowards of us all. And so I would just say that's our hope for these young families, that we get back to doing things biblically. The Bible definitely talks about discipline. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Talks about the foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and discipline, the rod of correction, will drive it far from them. Discipline is God's idea. We're to raise our children to know the Lord, and I pray that we get back to that, because I'm tired of losing kids after they turn age 18 because they weren't ready, they didn't have the right information, and they weren't resilient in the faith. I'm just tired of losing. And the answer to that starts in our homes. Yeah. We got to do what we need to do in the church, but it starts in our homes. Yeah. So that's our prayer as a church. Mm-hmm. Any parting thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Well, just thinking about that as far as, developing that resiliency, God does not seem to mind building that in us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so let's follow his example in that.
He disciplines his children.
Yeah, Hebrews 12. Because he loves us, right? And it's actually for our good. And then we learn to trust, I can trust you. You're good. You're still good. And so let's follow that example, grow from that.
That's good. Yeah. And I'd say parenting in my life has been one of the things that's built the most resilience personally, just raising kids and going through that has been one of the biggest developers. So it's It's also a
time.
personal story. You know, it's not just what we're doing, but it's what God's doing in us. It's growing us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Out of everything I've dealt with in my life, the pain of raising children was what almost made it so. It was the one I almost didn't get back up from.
Yep.
And I'm thankful to God, to the people He gave me in my life, to my wife, you know, that kept me going. Yep. I needed to be resilient, and it was God who helped me get through those dark times. But man, it pressed.
Yeah.
And so, well, hey, listen, Overtime Podcast. Next week we will be going into what is friendship, the world's version versus God's version, and I'm excited about doing that. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
And we have all kinds of different classes and tools. Not everything is at one campus or another, but overall, right now, media has a lot of our material. Be looking for some of our stuff that's coming out in the fall for men in particular. And I pray that you wake up, you pay attention, and you really focus on this is an area of your life where you need to have your eye on what God has in mind for you. This resiliency in the right things, pursuing God, walking with Him in spite of the war, not giving up, finishing to the end. And let's help each other do that. God bless you. See you next week on the Overtime Podcast.